Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to my cabin down by the creek. So today we're talking about World War III. Dun dun dun. The end of the world as we know it. Or Tawakani, as some people say. Tawakani? I don't know. One letter for every word of the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Gotta laugh to keep from crying. So I want to announce a new series where I talk about the coming World War or the current World War, depending on where you start measuring. In previous videos, I've talked about how the events in Israel could lead to a wider conflict in the Middle East. And I will save more discussions of that for a future video, but I want to talk about other elements that are going to come into play in this World War III scenario. So we have the war in Ukraine. That's been going on for some time now. I think it's approaching 2 years in February, if memory serves. And you've heard my response that we need to stay out of what is essentially a Russian civil war. And I've talked about the impact of that financially on our country. In the previous videos on what's going on in Israel and the Middle East, I talked about the pressures, the economic pressures and fallout, and also the potential for terrorism in the U.S. because of what's going on over there and our support for Israel. And I've been hammering Israel pretty good for the last week or so. But I want to talk about the wider conflict now. So we've got America involved in pouring finances that we don't really have into the Ukrainian war. Now we're going to pour more finances that we don't really have into the war in Israel and Palestine. And I think we will see boots on the ground in Israel. Let me rephrase that. We already have boots on the ground in Israel. That's well known. Now, are they openly engaging in the fighting or just in a support role? I think that remains to be seen. I think that they are possibly already involved in fighting in some of these incursions, looking for the hostages being held there in the tunnels, the Hamas tunnels under Palestine and the Gaza Strip. Now, with America distracted over here with Ukraine, now we're distracted over here with Israel. What does that mean for China? Some have come out with the theory, and I believe the theory is well-founded and potentially based on actual fact. And we do know that China has a 100-year plan. This involvement in these other foreign wars in Ukraine and in Israel and potentially in the greater conflict with Iran is something that China is drooling at the mouth to see happen. One could argue that they have been working behind the scenes to make it happen. This is just a extension of the Soviet Union's methods and plans and strategies, that they would involve us in these proxy wars to weaken our ability to defend ourselves. The good news is they never got us to the point where they felt like they could make an open move against the United States without fear of total destruction. China, on the other hand, never let go of that. They've been bringing financial pressure against the United States by buying up our debt, by purchasing huge tracts of land, by cornering the market on certain types of technologies. It's very disturbing to know that if we were to get EMP'd, an electromagnetic pulse into this country, that at this point we have to go to foreign nations to have our transformers built, because we no longer build them in the United States. So the fact of the matter is the threat of EMP is looming like never before. The value of an EMP from the Chinese perspective is that it's very hard to trace where it came from, especially once it's happened. A lot of the tools you'd use to investigate who did it would no longer be at our disposal due to the widespread devastation of our electronic instruments and electronic means that we use for daily life and especially even in the military. That yes, the military in some ways is hardened against EMP. Potentially our planes, trains, and automobiles would still function in the military versions of those things would, where the civilian versions would cease to function. And but so much of the military is relying upon the internet communication that's what you would call not necessary, but non-essential communications still rely on the internet. Email is used. Cell phone text messages are used heavily in the communication between service members, that we don't communicate via hardline telephone and radio transmissions anymore, or even the written word. It's all flying around via emails. So in so many ways, an EMP, put aside what it would do to the American people and the problems it would cause for all of us, potentially 90% death toll is what some people are saying, that we would die within a year. 90% of us would die because of the lack of essential and necessary services in the world. That everything from food production to water purification, transportation of food, all of this relies upon the transistor. It relies upon these computer chips in one form or another. Even modern tractors aren't the old crank up style anymore. They won't be able to start after an EMP. And so, but also our military would be very much hamstrung and very much limited in their ability to determine who is responsible for an EMP. So it allows a country to attack us with an EMP and without us having any clear indicator of who it was and who to punish and who to fight back against and who to point the missiles at. Even assuming that all of that still works after an EMP. So I think China has had the ability to do this to us for a very long time. But I think that they're waiting for the perfect moment. They're waiting for all of their other efforts to come to full fruition. That China is literally sitting on the edge of their seat, rubbing their hands together, going, yeah, get involved in Israel. Yeah, get involved in the Ukraine. Hey, they need to get involved with the war with Iran. Yeah, let's widen this out and bring in Turkey. Nobody's talking about Erdogan over there in Turkey. I was shocked to find out that Turkey has the second largest standing army in NATO. That they're a NATO member and they are the second largest next to the United States. That blew me away. I had no idea. And their navy is quite powerful. And Erdogan recently answered our sending 2 aircraft carriers into the Mediterranean by sending a portion of the Turkish fleet into the Eastern Mediterranean Sea to be present there. Not only that, he organized exercises, live fire exercises in the Eastern Mediterranean, right in the operating zone of both the Israeli and the United States Navy in the Eastern Mediterranean. So Turkey is also a wild card. China is a wild card. North Korea is a wild card. North Korea has been looking for any opportunity to advance its causes worldwide through the weakening of the United States. And so they're a wild card that we do not know what they would do. Would they challenge us in the Korean Peninsula in some way, knowing that we are draining assets to go to work in the Middle East? And it could create this domino effect that leads towards a China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Turkey, potentially Jordan, potentially Egypt coalition, along with the Russians joining them and being involved in that because they're basically involved in a proxy war with us in Ukraine. And we are full aware of Russia's support for Iran. And so what we're seeing are sides being drawn up, positions being taken. There's a battle right now for the hearts and minds of people and nations on the fringe, nations like Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon. What side are they going to fall on? Are they going to join Iran, potentially Turkey, uh, as well as Hezbollah and Hamas? Are they going to bring standing armies in support of these terrorist organizations, these militias in Palestine? Is Iran going to go from just funding it to actively getting involved in it? Hezbollah is the militia to the north, uh, operating in Jordan, and they are essentially a puppet of the Iranian government. When do the Iranians start launching attacks? Now, there was recently an interception of Yemeni drones and missiles, guided missiles, that had to travel to. They were traveling towards Israel. They launched a drone attack from Yemen. They launched a guided missile attack from Yemen that makes these little rockets that the Palestinians have look like nothing, and that came out of Yemen. And luckily, our Air Force was able to intercept them and destroy them en route. So we headed off a Yemeni attack, adding to the chaos of what's going on in the Middle East. So you have all of these nations, both great and small, that are becoming aligned against the United States, Israel, Ukraine. You can pretty much bet that the English are going to do what they've been doing for 100 years and support the United States wholeheartedly. So we have them on our side. But ultimately, a great portion of the world, and some of them very powerful countries, are lining now against the United States and Israel. And a big thing that's going to cause them to get involved is this overreaction, in my opinion, by Israel. I talked about this in the first World War III video that I did on the Sunday after the terrorist attack against Israel. I talked about how I called it, honestly. I called it straight down the line. I told you then in that first video that Russia, I keep doing that. Israel was going to over-respond, going to overreact, going to be more brutal than the more Gentile societies and any Arab nation could stand. And that they were going to unify the Arab nations against Israel, that because of Israel's overreaction, they were going to lose the support of European nations. The European Union is calling out Israel for their overreaction in Gaza, for their lack of humanitarian concern for the people of Palestine. It's very much souring in the stomachs of a lot of Americans and a lot of Europeans. And this trend is going to continue unless Israel can pull it back a notch. And I don't know that any of the Arab nations believe that the hospital attack was from a Hamas rocket. I found it hard to believe until I did the research myself and delved deeply into it. And now I'm still not ready to make a decision, but I tend to lean towards that it was an Arab Hamas rocket that caused the hospital destruction, the Baptist hospital's destruction in Gaza, resulting in 400 to 500 people being killed. The attack happened, or the device fell in the parking lot where hundreds or even thousands of people had been camping out. The displaced Palestinians had been camping out next to the hospital, hoping that was the one safe place that nobody would bomb. And that's very unfortunate. That's a horrible tragedy, what happened, the loss of lives there. And so in no way are any of these Arab nations, not Egypt, not Jordan, not even the split government of Lebanon, which is partially Maronite Catholic or Christian, that Christians in Lebanon have a big say in the Lebanese government. And but even Lebanon, being basically 2/3 Arab, 2/3 Muslim, they're not buying the story of that rocket in the hospital destruction either. They're blaming Israel. They're saying it was an aerial attack. And I don't think you'll ever convince them otherwise. This has given them yet another level of resolve, even though it looks like it might have been at the hands of a Hamas adjacent, Muslim Brotherhood group there in Palestine, in Gaza. But you'll never convince any of the Arabs, not Egypt, not Saudis. None of them are going to believe that. They're all going to believe it was an intentional targeting by Israel. And so you're going to have an Arab coalition that one by one, not unlike how the Confederates states one by one seceded from the Union over several course of several days. You're going to have the same kind of domino effect with these Arab nations like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan in particular. And then Iran is going to get involved in some way beyond what they're already doing. And open warfare between the United States and Iran is on the table. This will trigger their allies to back them. This will trigger even Egypt to get involved, I believe. And let's talk about Hezbollah in the north of Israel. Bully, stop scratching. I got him a new flea collar, but it ain't helping. I'm going to have to give him a bath. You can hear him scratching? But yeah, Hezbollah in the north, operating out of Lebanon, this finger puppet of Iran, made some statements that they said they're not getting involved right now in any major way, but they're going to when the time is right. And when you analyze that statement, what they're basically telling the Israelis is that when the ground incursion into Gaza happens, when the tanks cross the border and enter Gaza, and the Israeli invasion begins, then you can expect a steady stream of Hezbollah rockets and missiles and drones coming out of southern Lebanon. That right now they're just these are like warning shots. These are like punctuations to the politics. But when they invade Gaza in a real and major way, you can expect Hezbollah in the southern Lebanon high grounds to start raining down hell on northern Israel, which includes Tel Aviv, where even more innocent people live there, just trying to live their lives. Many of them American expatriates or people with dual citizenship are in Tel Aviv. And it's going to cause the United States to get involved in some way, probably in a naval bombardment from these ships, or even sorties being flown against southern Lebanon with United States fighter planes being launched from these aircraft carriers that are there in the eastern Mediterranean. That might cause then Iran to respond and attack our ships, or it could cause the Turkish Navy to get involved and begin to engage in sea battles against our aircraft carrier groups that are there. Without a doubt, it's going to cause, and probably already has caused, our Navy to shift their focus from the South China Sea in keeping China wrapped up and encased in a presence there of American military, that our Navy more than likely will start migrating more and more to the big bodies of water adjacent to the Middle East, the Persian Gulf from one side, the Mediterranean from the other, ships coming up into the Red Sea. And we're going to have to move our resources, which will in some way leave us more vulnerable in Korea, leave us more vulnerable in the South China Sea. China intends to take Taiwan at some point. They would like to just roll in there with no opposition. I ran this past my brother-in-law, who is a retired Navy officer who was an electronics engineer on a nuclear submarine for many, many years, spent 20 years of his life more or less underwater. And you know, his opinion is that the Taiwanese army, the Taiwanese military, apart from the U.S. protection of Taiwan, that the military itself, that they're going to fight to the very last man, that the Taiwanese are not going to let the Chinese just roll in and take over, and they're not going to lay down. China would like that, but I think through our decades of support for Taiwan and the training of their military forces there, that they're going to put up, pardon my French, one hell of a fight, with or without the United States backing them up. But it's going to be, for the Chinese, it's going to be doable. They can fight the Taiwanese. The Chinese can fight them, not with America standing in between, running interference. And if we're spread to Ukraine, if that becomes a boots on the ground in Ukraine, we already have NATO United States troops under NATO in Poland, in I think Hungary, and a lot of these other nations that surround Ukraine. So we've got a presence there it can't really go anywhere unless we want to completely lose the Ukrainian war and allow potentially Russia to invade other NATO nations. We have to leave those protections there. We have an obligation to the Koreans. We have an obligation to the Taiwanese, the Philippines, and to protect our assets in Guam in the South China Sea. And but if the more heavily we get involved in what's going on in Israel, more of our assets will have to be pulled to the into the Eastern Mediterranean and in support of Israel. And this is something that we're already seeing our government do. And if it widens into a regional conflict, you're going to see more of our assets going in that direction. We may have to send even more assets if we want to continue to back the Ukrainians, which I am not in favor of. Between Ukraine and Iran, and potentially what involvement we could get with the Taiwanese issue, is going to pull Russia fully into this axis of evil, this ally of from hell, these allies from hell, which, let's list them out here. We've got North Korea, China, Russia, potentially Turkey, potentially even the Christian minority government in Lebanon. Egypt might come into this coalition. We've also got these Southern American countries like Venezuela, who has a huge oil asset on the market. It could start with sanctions against the United States, embargoes against the United States, naval blockades in any of these regions, whether it be Taiwan, the Eastern Mediterranean, or even, I believe, the Black Sea. We're operating in the Black Sea with the Ukrainian conflict over there. And so you could see naval battles start to happen. And all this could happen before World War III is officially declared. I will say this, after Biden spoke yesterday, the hashtag video hot word right now is WW3. That people are seeing now what I predicted some time ago, that we are in the beginning stages of World War III and have been for some time. And history will look back and probably look at what we did in Ukraine as the foundational starting point for World War III. And they will see the Hamas attack against Israel as a major flashpoint leading to World War III. And if Taiwan gets involved, if China gets involved in trying to crowd Taiwan, trying to force Taiwan, trying to engulf Taiwan, potentially a naval blockade of Taiwan, that's going to be another flashpoint. We could see an attack against our forces in Guam. We could see pressure on the Philippines from China. And all this adds up to FUBAR. All this adds up to World War III. If you're a student of history, if you look at World War I and World War II, and not just the years of the war, but the years leading up to the war, this is how I've said that we're on the verge of civil war in the United States, because I'm a student of how we got to the battle for the Fort Sumter and the invasion of the South by the North, and the secession of the states out of the Union. Because I know that this is a potential for our country, because I learned from history. The old saying is, if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it. And this is something that Biden recently said to Netanyahu: don't repeat the mistakes we made after 9/11, that we engaged in a 20-year war that ultimately we more or less lost because of our outrage and our don't let rage rule your intellect. Don't make decisions based on emotional outcry. And I thought, as much as I'm not a big fan of Biden by any means, right? He's the baby sniffing, creepy Uncle Joe, and I got no respect for the man. And I won't even say the thing that might get me in trouble with who at YouTube about what happened in 2020, right? But having said all that, somebody who is programming that Weekend at Bernie's remake that we call president is saying something right. It's saying something correct to the Israeli people, that they need to show restraint. They need to not make decisions based on emotion. They need to not turn this into a greater conflict. And I think that's getting some purchase with the Israeli government. I think they're listening to some degree. I think they're very aware. That's why they've basically started talking about, we're going to let a trickle of humanitarian aid into Palestine. We're going to make sure that we are doing this for the right reason, and that we're implementing this response in a reasonable way. I think some of that is starting to show up over there, and maybe, just maybe, we can head this off of the pass and prevent a much greater war. But I'm predicting this is World War III. And to quote a famous person, I believe it was Albert Einstein, who said, "I don't know with what weapons we will fight World War III, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Tell me what you think in the comment section. And I'll tell you this, just because you served and I didn't doesn't mean you're an expert on this. You're not an expert on this unless you spend as much time as I do in the news. And I don't mean just CBS. I mean all the American news, all the Australian news, all of the every news channel that is presented, and every YouTube channel that is presented in English that talks about this. I'm all over it, from Tim Pool to Sky to Sun to, that sounds like I'm talking about the Sky and Sun, but Sky News in Australia. You have to look at Al Jazeera, even if you don't agree with them or think they represent terrorists. You need to hear all the information to weigh it out. It's the only defense against propaganda. If your news source is one or two outlets, you're probably getting part of the truth. And you really can't make decisions or have a strong opinion on part of the truth. And because you served 20 years ago, if you're not keeping up with this, you're no more qualified than anybody else to talk about it. I'm qualified to talk about this because I put in the effort, I put in the work, I put in the time, and I spent all of my time in prayer, because I also do preaching on this channel, and this is tied to the end times for sure. Study, right, of scripture, but also I consume an immense amount of news from around the world, and I encourage you to do the same thing so you can better predict and see what's coming. I think what's coming is bad because I'm getting information from every possible source. I wish I may get a translation program so I can start listening to things that are coming out of Eastern Europe, like Poland and Hungary and Finland. What are they saying? And I guess that's not being presented in English in any way that I've found. So I may have to get an interpreter program so I can interpret some of the news coming out of those countries to see where the world opinion really lies on this. So I encourage you to learn more about what's going on. I encourage you to pray a lot about protection of your family and your community. I encourage you to do the necessary things it takes to protect your home and family. And I encourage you to support this channel. If you don't have the time to do all this research, then you need to support this channel, because it allows me to have the time to do the work for you. Like I used to say with Coffee Talks, I almost called them, instead of Coffee Talks, I almost called them, I watch the documentaries so you don't have to. So I'm watching Al Jazeera and Sky News and the CBC out of Canada and the BBC out of England, and I'm monitoring all of this news so you don't have to. So support this channel, keep me online, keep me functioning, keep my bills paid here. I don't have any infrastructure except what it takes for me to maintain this one little cabin in the woods and keep me and my family, my family of animals. And just so you know, I've picked up a little extended family here. I'm kind of been the adopted grandpa to some folks. So, yeah, that's actually a good thing. I'm going to put little man, the little baby that I've been taking care of a lot, on this channel at some point when it's appropriate. He's quite a handful. I taught him to do this, and I taught him to blow kisses. So, all right, well, we'll see you next time. Please support this channel. There's a link in the description to PayPal. There's a link in the description to Cash App. My P.O. box is there. You can send me an email. And we'll see you next time from Sage Wanderer's cabin down by the creek.